I moved into my dream house on Maple Ridge Drive on a gorgeous April morning, completely unaware that my new neighbor would turn a simple garden hose into a full-scale property war. The house was everything I had worked for, a charming craftsman with a wraparound porch, mature oak trees, and enough land for the vegetable garden I'd been planning for years. I'm a landscape architect by trade, and after 2 decades of designing award-winning gardens for tech executives and celebrities across 3 states, I finally had the time and space to create something for myself. The neighborhood seemed perfect: quiet streets, well-maintained homes, and neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs. My next-door neighbor Karen introduced herself the second day with a store-bought pie and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was probably in her late 50s, with the kind of severe haircut that suggested she'd been asking for the manager since before it was a meme. "Oh, how wonderful to have someone with your expertise in the neighborhood. I'm sure you'll keep your property looking absolutely pristine. We have standards here on Maple Ridge." Before you dive deeper into this insane tale of garden warfare and property revenge, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World. Trust me, you're going to want to follow along for every satisfying twist in this story, and we've got plenty more where this came from. I should have caught the warning signs in that first conversation, but I was too focused on unpacking and planning my garden layout. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing the soil, installing a professional-grade irrigation system, and setting up the bones of what would become a showcase garden. My background meant I had access to rare plant specimens and the knowledge to create something truly special. I'd designed gardens featured in Architectural Digest, after all. That's when I noticed my water bill. The first month came in at $372. I live alone, work long hours, and hadn't even finished planting yet. There was absolutely no reason for my water usage to be that high. I checked all my indoor fixtures, looking for leaks, running dye tests in the toilets, examining the water heater. Nothing. Then I checked my irrigation system, which I'd barely used. Everything was functioning properly, no leaks, no issues. I was standing in my backyard, genuinely puzzled, when I saw it. A green garden hose snaking from my outdoor spigot, across the property line, and into Karen's yard. I followed it with my eyes and watched as Karen stood in her garden, my hose in hand, watering her roses like she owned the place. She hadn't asked permission, hadn't mentioned it. Just helped herself to my water supply like it was a community resource. I walked over calmly. I'm not one for confrontation, and honestly, I thought this had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe the previous owners had some arrangement I didn't know about. "Hey Karen, I noticed you're using my hose. I'm not sure if you realized, but that's connected to my water supply, and I'm paying for that usage. My bill last month was pretty shocking." She turned to me with this expression of absolute indifference. "Oh, that? Yes, my spigot broke last month, and I've been meaning to get it fixed. Your hose reaches just fine, so I figured it wasn't a big deal. Water's cheap anyway." Then she literally turned her back on me and continued watering. I stood there for a moment, processing the audacity. Water's cheap? My $372 bill would beg to differ. "Actually, Karen, it's not cheap, and I'd appreciate it if you'd unhook from my spigot. You're welcome to get your plumbing fixed and use your own water supply." I kept my voice level, professional. This was a simple boundary-setting conversation between neighbors. God, you don't have to be so uptight about it. Fine. She made a big show of huffing and puffing as she turned off the water, but I noticed she didn't actually disconnect the hose. She just left it attached to my spigot and went inside her house. The next day, I came home from a client meeting to find her watering again. Same hose. Same complete disregard for the conversation we'd had 24 hours earlier. This time I didn't walk over to chat. I simply disconnected her hose from my spigot and coiled it up on her side of the property line. Problem solved, right? Wrong. The following morning, I was working from home when I glanced out the window and saw Karen in my yard, reconnecting her hose to my spigot. She saw me watching and had the nerve to wave. Not a friendly wave, a territorial wave. What are you going to do about it? Wave. I went outside immediately. Karen, we talked about this. You cannot use my water. This is theft of services. I was still trying to be reasonable, still giving her the benefit of the doubt that maybe she genuinely didn't understand the problem. Theft? Oh please, it's just water. The previous owners never had a problem with it. She crossed her arms over her chest, defiant. I'm not the previous owners, and yes, it is theft. You're using a utility I pay for without my permission. Please disconnect your hose and keep it disconnected. You know what your problem is? You people move into established neighborhoods and think you can just change everything. This is how we do things on Maple Ridge Drive. We help each other out. But I guess you're too selfish for that. You people. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I'm biracial, and I've heard that phrase in many contexts throughout my life. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt and assume she meant new neighbors, rather than anything more sinister, but the entitled tone was unmistakable. This isn't about being neighborly, Karen. This is about you using something that isn't yours without asking and without offering to compensate me for it. If you want to be neighborly, get your own spigot fixed. I disconnected the hose again, and this time I went inside and turned off the outdoor water supply at the shutoff valve. Let her try to use it now. But turning off my outdoor water meant I couldn't use my irrigation system, which was a problem since I'd just planted several $1,000s worth of specimen plants that needed consistent watering to establish themselves. So I turned the water back on, and installed a locking hose bib cover over my outdoor spigot. Problem solved. Or so I thought. 2 days later, Karen knocked on my door, red-faced and furious. You need to remove that lock right now. I need to water my garden. Then use your own water, Karen. That's why I installed the lock. My plumber can't come out for another 2 weeks. My roses will die. You're being completely unreasonable. I took a deep breath. Your lack of planning is not my emergency. You've had weeks to deal with this. You can buy water from the city, you can collect rainwater, or you can pay for emergency plumber services. What you cannot do is steal my water. She sputtered for a moment, then her eyes narrowed. You're going to regret this. I'm on the HOA board, and we have very specific rules about neighborly conduct and property maintenance. Great, I look forward to reading them. Have a good day, Karen. I closed the door. The first HOA violation notice arrived 3 days later. Apparently, my mailbox was 4 inches too far from the curb. The second notice came 2 days after that. My house numbers were the wrong font according to the covenant codes and conditions. Then came citations for my trash cans being visible from the street, even though I brought them in within the required time frame, for a small patch of clover in my lawn that was classified as a weed, and for my garden edging being a 1/4 inch too high. I'm a professional landscape architect. I know property codes, local ordinances, and HOA regulations better than most lawyers know the law. Every single citation Karen sent me was either completely fabricated or a gross misinterpretation of the actual rules. But each one required me to respond in writing, provide photographic evidence of compliance, and attend HOA meetings to dispute the citations. She was weaponizing the HOA, and she was doing it because I wouldn't let her steal my water. The pettiness was almost impressive in its scope. Almost. I decided to take a different approach. I'm not without resources, both financial and professional. One of my long-term clients is a real estate attorney who specializes in property disputes and HOA litigation. I sent him all the violation notices, and we had a very interesting conversation about Karen's position on the board and her pattern of harassment. She's opening the HOA up to a lawsuit if she continues this pattern, and she's definitely violating her fiduciary duty as a board member. You could go after her personally, and the HOA collectively. But that's expensive and time-consuming, even if you'd win. He paused. Though, there might be another approach. Let me look into something. While he researched, Karen escalated. She filed a complaint with the city claiming my irrigation system was violating water restrictions. It wasn't. She called code enforcement claiming I was running a business from my home without proper permits. I wasn't. She even tried to get my builder's permits revoked for the garden shed I was constructing, claiming it violated setback requirements. It didn't. Every claim was investigated and dismissed, but it was death by 1,000 cuts. Each complaint required my time, attention, and documentation to disprove. I'd spend hours compiling evidence, attending meetings, and defending myself against completely baseless accusations. And through it all, I'd see Karen in her garden, smirking, watering her precious roses with expensive bottled water she'd bought rather than just fixing her plumbing. Then I noticed something interesting. Her rose garden, the one she'd been so desperate to water with my hose, was looking spectacular. Too spectacular. I've been working with plants for 20 years, and I know what consistent care and professional maintenance looks like. Her garden had gone from nice to showcase quality in a matter of weeks. That level of transformation doesn't happen naturally. I did some quiet investigating and discovered Karen had hired my top competitor, another landscape architect in the area, to revamp her entire backyard. The cost? Somewhere north of $60,000. So she had money for a complete garden renovation but couldn't afford to fix a broken spigot? The economics didn't add up, which meant the broken spigot was likely a lie. She just decided my water was easier to access than her own. That's when my attorney friend called back. Okay, I found something interesting. The HOA covenants for your neighborhood were established in 1995 and haven't been updated since. There's a clause in there about water usage and conservation that I think you're going to find very, very interesting. He explained that the original covenants required all properties to implement water conservation measures and prohibited wasteful water practices. The language was vague, written before modern irrigation systems existed, and had never been enforced. But technically, decorative gardens that required excessive watering could be classified as wasteful, especially during drought conditions. Our area had been under a moderate drought advisory for 3 months. Karen's new rose garden, with its thirsty hybrid tea roses and water-intensive landscaping, was about as far from water conservation as you could get. And as an HOA board member, she was supposed to be enforcing these rules, not violating them. Here's the thing, if someone were to file a formal complaint, the HOA would be obligated to investigate. And given that she's on the board, any violation would be pretty serious. Conflict of interest, failure to uphold covenant standards, the works. I smiled. That's fascinating information. Thank you. But I didn't file a complaint. That would be too simple, too quick, and not nearly proportionate to the months of harassment I'd endured. No, I had a better idea. A much, much better idea. See, one thing Karen didn't know about me is that before I became a landscape architect, I studied environmental science and water management. I'd worked for the State Water Resources Department during graduate school. I knew water law, water rights, and water conservation regulations at a level that would make most city planners jealous. I started documenting everything. Karen's watering schedule, the types of plants in her garden, the square footage of her landscaped area, and her water usage patterns. I calculated that her new garden required approximately 250 gallons of water per day during peak season to maintain its appearance. That's 7,500 gallons per month, just for decorative landscaping, during a drought advisory. Then I did something that would set everything else in motion. I filed a formal request with the City Water Department for detailed water usage records for my street, citing concerns about neighborhood conservation compliance. It's public information, available to anyone who asks. The records showed exactly what I suspected. Karen's water usage had skyrocketed since her garden renovation, far exceeding reasonable residential use. I compiled all of this into a detailed report, complete with photographs, water usage analysis, and citations to local drought response ordinances. Then I sent it to the city's Water Conservation Office, the Regional Water Authority, and the State Environmental Quality Department. Not as a complaint, but as a concerned citizen inquiry about whether such usage was compliant with current drought response measures. Government wheels turn slowly, but they turn thoroughly. Within 2 weeks, Karen received a notice from the city water department that her property had been flagged for excessive water usage during a drought advisory period. She was required to submit a water conservation plan and reduce her consumption by 40% or face progressive penalty rates that would triple her water bill. She came to my door, notice in hand, absolutely livid. "Did you do this? Did you report me to the city?" "I have no idea what you're talking about, Karen. But if you're using excessive water during a drought, that does seem like something the city would be concerned about. My garden is going to die. They want me to cut my water usage by 40%. That's impossible. Then maybe you should have thought about that before installing a water-intensive garden during a drought. There are plenty of drought-tolerant plants that would look beautiful. I'd be happy to recommend some. It's literally my job." She practically vibrated with rage. "This is because of the hose, isn't it? You're such a petty, spiteful person." The irony of Karen calling anyone else petty was not lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. "This is because you're wasting water during a drought, Karen. The city takes that seriously, as they should. Have a good day." But I wasn't done. Not even close. See, that report I'd filed had done more than just flag her property. It had triggered a broader review of water usage patterns and developments, with HOA-managed landscaping requirements. And our HOA had very specific requirements about lawn maintenance, plant health, and property aesthetics that, when combined with drought restrictions, created an interesting legal paradox. The HOA required properties to maintain green lawns and healthy landscaping, but the city now required reduced water usage. Homeowners were caught between HOA fines for brown lawns and city penalties for excessive watering. It was an unsustainable situation, and it was about to get much worse. I attended the next HOA meeting, my first since moving in, and proposed a solution. The HOA needed to update its landscaping covenants to align with modern water conservation requirements. We needed to allow xeriscaping, drought-tolerant plants, and reduced lawn areas. It was the environmentally responsible thing to do, and it would protect homeowners from being caught between competing requirements. The board, including Karen, voted it down. Karen led the opposition, arguing that allowing drought-tolerant landscaping would hurt property values and ruin the neighborhood's aesthetic. "We have standards here. If people wanted to live in a desert, they should move to Arizona." Perfect. I recorded the meeting, as was my right under HOA bylaws, and documented every word of Karen's opposition to water conservation measures. Then I filed a second report, this time with the Regional Water Authority, documenting that our HOA was actively preventing homeowners from complying with drought response measures by requiring water-intensive landscaping. I included the meeting recording, the covenant language, and Karen's statements opposing conservation efforts. The Regional Water Authority does not mess around when it comes to drought compliance. They sent a formal notice to the HOA requiring immediate covenant amendments to allow water-conserving landscaping, and they opened an investigation into whether the HOA's landscaping requirements constituted a violation of regional water conservation mandates. The HOA was now facing potential fines and legal action because of covenants that Karen had voted to maintain. The other board members were furious. Emergency meetings were called. Lawyers were consulted. And through it all, Karen's water bill kept climbing as she desperately tried to keep her showcase garden alive under the new restricted usage rates. But here's where my real plan came into play. Remember how I mentioned I'm a landscape architect with high-profile clients? One of those clients happens to be a commercial real estate developer who specializes in sustainable, water-efficient properties. We'd worked together on several award-winning projects that showcased how beautiful landscaping could be achieved with minimal water usage. I approached him with an interesting opportunity. There was a vacant lot at the end of Maple Ridge Drive, right at the neighborhood entrance. It had been for sale for years because it was an odd shape and size, too small for a standard home but too large for the city to want to maintain as a green space. I proposed that his company buy the lot and install a demonstration garden showcasing drought-tolerant, water-efficient landscaping. It would be a living laboratory, a community resource, and excellent publicity for his sustainable development brand. The garden would be professionally maintained, open to the public, and would demonstrate that water conservation and beauty weren't mutually exclusive. He loved the idea. His company bought the lot for cash, and I donated my design services. We broke ground within a month. The garden was stunning: native grasses, succulents, drought-adapted perennials, and a beautiful rainwater collection system that would make every drop count. We installed educational signage about water conservation, information about plant selection, and data showing how much water the gardens saved compared to traditional landscaping. The local news covered it. The mayor gave a speech at the opening. The Regional Water Authority held it up as an example of responsible landscaping during drought conditions. And it was located right at the entrance to our neighborhood, where every single resident, including Karen, would drive past it multiple times a day. But that wasn't the revenge. That was just setting the stage. The revenge came when the city, inspired by our demonstration garden, passed a new ordinance requiring all new landscaping projects over a certain square footage to submit water usage plans and demonstrate compliance with conservation guidelines. Existing gardens over a certain size that had been installed within the last 2 years would need to be registered and could be subject to review if they exceeded water usage thresholds. Karen's garden, installed 4 months ago, fell squarely into that category. She would need to register it, submit documentation, and potentially redesign it if it was deemed non-compliant with the new conservation standards. The alternative was continuing to pay triple rates on her water bill, which would cost her thousands of dollars per year. She had 3 choices: let her $60,000 garden die, pay exponentially increasing water bills indefinitely, or rip it out and start over with water-efficient landscaping. Every single option cost her dearly, and every single option was a direct result of her own actions and her refusal to support water conservation measures. I was in my front yard, installing a beautiful new drought-tolerant succulent garden, when Karen came outside and saw the city inspector's truck parked in front of her house. She watched as he measured her garden, photographed her irrigation system, and documented her water-intensive plant selections. I saw the exact moment she connected all the dots: the water usage report, the HOA covenant battle, the demonstration garden, the new city ordinance, and the inspection happening in her yard. She turned to look at me, and our eyes met across our property line. I was holding a drought-tolerant agave plant in one hand and a trowel in the other, my own garden thriving beautifully with a fraction of the water hers required. The inspector was writing notes, shaking his head at her thirsty hybrid tea roses. Her face went from confused to comprehending to absolutely horrified as she realized that every single thing that had happened, from the city reports to the new ordinance, had originated from her decision to steal water from my hose. Her own petty theft and subsequent harassment had triggered a chain of events that had turned her dream garden into a legal and financial nightmare, all completely legally, all completely proportionately, and all completely permanently. The inspector handed her a packet of paperwork, tipped his hat, and drove away. Karen stood there, papers in hand, staring at me with an expression of such complete and utter defeat that I almost felt bad. Almost. If you enjoyed watching Karen's water theft scheme backfire spectacularly, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Karen Eat World for more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in this situation, because trust me, we've got plenty more epic revenge stories coming your way.